Okay, I think we're ready to begin. People are still joining, but I just wanted to get started to welcome everyone to this very special event, an opportunity to hear Farah Nabulsi, the Palestinian filmmaker who's burst onto the world stage, and Professor Nadera Shalhoub-Kevorkian, a treasured member of our wider intellectual community at the Center for Palestine Studies at Columbia. I'm Lila Abu-Lughod, a member of the faculty collective of the Center for Palestine Studies and a professor of anthropology and gender studies at Columbia. And I'm really honored to be facilitating this conversation. I hope you all managed to watch the present and Hadiyah, either through the link you received by registering for this event or before, as so many of us have done when it was screened elsewhere or available on Netflix. Not something we can say about many of the films that we screen by Palestinian filmmakers. And this event is part of a series that we're particularly proud of at the Center for Palestine Studies called Palestine Cuts, in recognition of the extraordinary quality of the flourishing Palestinian film world. We developed this series to highlight this transnational cinema, I would have to call it, not national cinema, and to bring to campus Palestinian filmmakers to talk to us about their work. They talk about their practice, they give master classes, they make themselves available to us to ask questions and to learn. We screen their films from works in progress by student filmmakers in Gaza and 48 Palestine, to thought-provoking documentaries, to experimental shorts, award-winning feature films such as those by May Masri, Ilya Suleiman, Raed Andoni, Hani Abu Asad, to mention just a few of those that we've been able to host. And I'm happy to say that Farah Nabulsi has joined this illustrious group, and we think that the wide circulation and recognition her film has garnered is a really great step forward, not just for recognizing her and Palestinian cinema, but for communicating to wider publics the situations that Palestinians endure under Israeli rule. Since the pandemic, we've had to move Palestine Cuts online, but we're actually finding that the virtual platform has allowed people from all over the world to join us, though we miss being with you in person. We're glad to be able to share these opportunities. And I know we have a lot of interest in this event, so welcome to everyone, even though we can't see you out there. And thank you, Farah and Nadera, for taking the time to join us, especially given the time differences. We're in at least three different time zones. And before I say a few more words of introduction about our guests, I wanted to thank Simone Rutkowitz, our extraordinary program coordinator at the Center for Palestine Studies, for everything she does to support our work. And I also wanted to mention the Levi churches, whose generous support to Palestine Cuts over many years has been so enabling for us. And I encourage all of you to go to our CPS website and look at who else we've hosted through Palestine Cuts, and to watch the recordings of some of these conversations with filmmakers. But today we have the chance to talk with Farah Nabulsi about her Academy Award nominated and BAFTA Award winning short film, The Present. And just briefly, introductions. Farah is a Palestinian British filmmaker, born, raised, and educated in the UK, just why I call it transnational Palestinian cinema. She began working in the film industry as a writer and producer only in 2016 as a second career for her, in order to explore topics that mattered to her. And she's quickly become a unique and powerful voice in presenting the violations of human rights of Palestinians and the violence of the Israeli military occupation through a series of short fiction films with exquisite production values that are accessible and moving, visually stunning, and often haunting. And her films include Today They Took My Son, Oceans of Injustice, Nightmare of Gaza, and now the award-winning The Present, which she directed and co-wrote, and I noticed it was produced by Philistine Films, dear to us, and co-written with Hind Shufani, someone whose own incredible film about her father I've been wanting to show as part of Palestine Cuts. So it reminds me to get back to her about that. In conversation with her is Professor Nadera Shalhoub-Kevorkian, the Global Chair in Law at Queen Mary University of London, and author of many brilliant articles, so many that we'd be here all day if I were to go through them, but also 3 groundbreaking books: Militarization and Violence Against Women in Conflict Zones in the Middle East, a Palestinian Case Study, Security Theology, Surveillance, and the Politics of Fear, and the devastating new book, Incarcerated Childhood and the Politics of Unchilding, that was shortlisted for the Palestine Book Awards, recipient of the Association of Middle East Children and Youth Studies Book Award, and all were published by Cambridge University Press. And it's this last book and her research on children that we thought would make her such a good interlocutor for today. And in the book, that just to have a personal note, in the book that she and I and Professor Rima Hamami are now in the final stages of co-editing, called The Cunning of Gender Violence, to be published by Duke University Press, her chapter on the stories schoolgirls tell about the violence they experience from soldiers and settlers on their way to school in occupied East Jerusalem came so much to my mind as I watched Farah's film, every time I watch Farah's film. So I'm going to open up by asking Farah to talk about her film, her process of conceiving and making it. And I hope she'll be able to also talk about the responses to it. Then I'll turn it over to Nadera to respond to the film and to expand on the issues that this film brings home to us in such a kind of stark but understated way. Then we'll try to share some of the questions from our audience. So I want to make sure that you know, I see a lot of people are here. Please put your questions at any point in the Q&A, not the chat. I don't think you have access to the chat and we won't see it, but the Q&A. And we'll do our best to pose as many of them as we have time for at the end. And we'll have to be selective. So apologies in advance if we don't get to yours. We only have until 2:15 New York time. What's that, 9:15 Palestine time and London time, somewhere in the middle. Okay, so welcome everybody and welcome. So Farah, I wanted to just open up with a couple of questions. This is a powerful film, short, deceptively simple, heartbreaking and infuriating, about a very complex situation. And as my colleague Hamid Dabashi pointed out when I was just being introduced to Palestinian cinema through Dreams of a Nation, the Palestinian Film Festival he organized with Anne-Marie Jasser, Philistine Films, when she was still a student in the film school at Columbia. The checkpoint has become a key signifier of the occupation and a ubiquitous trope in Palestinian cinema, just as it's a ubiquitous structure of control for Palestinians. So I was just wanting to hear you a bit more. What was your thinking about using the checkpoint as the crux of this film? How did this, more generally, how did this father-daughter story come to you? Big question, but wherever you can start.
Sure. So I think, first of all, in the world of film, you have to go where your creativity takes you. So it can't be overly contrived. You know, it can't be the other way around where I say, okay, I'd like to make a film about checkpoints, so now I need to find inspiration, or now I need to come up with a story. That's not the way it works. For me, it was a matter of a story specifically the story that you watched, in its most basic form. Man goes, gets fridge, comes back, doesn't fit, and so forth, through a checkpoint. The inspiration for it ultimately was, first of all, me as a Palestinian traveling in Palestine myself, having experienced these Israeli checkpoints numerous times, witnessed dozens, hundreds of Palestinians at these checkpoints, and the sort of humiliations and the stresses and the exhaustion and what it means to be subjected to them and processed through them. And then I also have a friend that I have gotten to know over the years of going back and forth and spending time there. And he does live in an area where there is a checkpoint around 100 meters from his home. And so the seed for this particular story, in some ways you could say, was based on a conversation I had with him, standing on one side of that checkpoint, which is a checkpoint that's most reflective of the main checkpoint in the film, with a turnstile and a metal detector. As you know, there's over 100 Israeli checkpoints all over the West Bank and another 100 or so flying checkpoints. And each one, they have similar materials and concept, but they don't look the same. So this particular checkpoint was like that. And we stood and we had a conversation, and I said to him, so Abid, if you wanted to bring a new couch home, what do you do? And he said, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't go. And I just thought that is the most absurd thing I'd ever heard. And then the conversation got even more convoluted. And I said, what if you wanted to bring a hammer home? You need to do some DIY at home. He said, do you want to get me shot? You know, what a convoluted, bizarre conversation to be having about bringing objects to your home, you know? So this is, and at this point, I haven't decided I'm making a film about this, but that the seed of this idea of, I recognize that these checkpoints, far more tragic, inhumane things do occur at these checkpoints, whether it's women giving birth at these checkpoints, people dying at these checkpoints, and so forth. But it was in the mundane, it was in the basic element of, you just want to go buy something and bring it home. And of course, you know, I also know and have spoken with people of circumstances where they've bought, you know, food home and, you know, we're told at a checkpoint, I think that's a few too many cans of Coke you have there. I think that's a few too many tomatoes. You know, it's almost, so it's in the mundane. It's in this very basic concept of, yes, the basic human right of freedom of movement, but now let's go to the layer of simple daily acts and process. So this is where the inspiration for the story was born. It wasn't that I was looking for a checkpoint story. Now, what also fascinated me, though, was what checkpoints do, not just on the individual level, but with the family dynamic, with the community dynamic, and then, of course, on the sort of national, if you like, you know, the bigger dynamic. And that was always intriguing to me, because in terms of this control system, of which the checkpoints are only just one part of, it is a part that is across the West Bank in that sense, and that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, are having to deal with on a daily basis. And I always say, you know, a home being demolished is far, far more painful, tragic, and than, you know, someone not being able to bring a fridge home. But it is not something that, you know, an individual has to experience day in and day out over and over again. And so what does that do to wear down an individual, families, communities, of this constant degradation, the constant humiliation, the constant exhaustion, the constant, I don't know if I'm going to get somewhere in time, putting aside the purpose of the checkpoints also separating Palestinians from Palestinians even, which of course fragments communities. But what does that do on the human level? And so it was this interest and fascination, and then this inspiration for a specific basic story, and the meeting of the two, and that is where the checkpoint story came from.
That's amazing and so right. Yeah, thank you so much. You know, there's so many questions. This one's a little bit different, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because, you know, I've watched it a couple of times, and it's sort of hard for me to articulate, but I'd really love to get your thoughts on this before we hear from Nadera, who of course has written about a lot of the things that you just talked about. And this was something sort of strange that I felt as I was watching the film. And I think a lot of people felt this way, who are familiar with the situation that you just described in Palestine, either through living there, traveling there, working through there, or through the news, activism, scholarship. And so what I felt I was, as I was watching it, I was watching it with kind of a double consciousness. I don't know if that's the right term for this, but I was caught up in the story and the poignancy of the situation, and how well you had captured something really important there. But I was feeling that it wasn't really made for me, but for others who didn't know and didn't feel what I know and feel, and all of us know and feel who know anything about this situation, people who have somehow managed to keep themselves ignorant or unfamiliar with the realities of this inhumanity of this Israeli military and security violence, are really what you captured, the slow, everyday forms of violence against Palestinians. So yes, it felt like familiar and so accurate, even though it was fiction, even though it distilled something incredible. Yes, it managed to convey the Palestinian humanity that we all know through this loving relationship and the kind of mutual pain of watching the suffering of those you love without being able to protect them. I mean, I think it's amazing that way. I'm sure Nadera will talk about that. But I kept thinking somehow that it was made for someone else. And I was hoping desperately that these others were watching sort of over my shoulders and to be moved and to finally kind of see. So this made me want to, hear a little bit more about how you think about audiences, who you make your films for, and if you could share with us some of the responses to this film from different audiences. Obviously there are many positive ones, and it's really terrific that it has gotten such play. I mean, we're also proud and happy about that, and indebted to you. But were there hostile responses as well, and just sort of your thoughts about who you make your films for?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would say is it was so nice to hear you say all of that, in the sense of, I think, as a filmmaker, let's put aside even subject matter, as a filmmaker, it excites you to make, at least for me, a film that does open people's eyes to just the truths of life in many ways, and film in many ways is sort of a metaphor for life, but at the same time, I'm very interested in raising the global social conscience. And that's the kind of films I want to be making, and I hope to be making. And I believe what David Dormino quotation, he said, true art has a role and responsibility to take a stand, because the fundamental role of the artist is to help people shape their point of view in a way that liberates us. And I love that. And I believe that there is that role in art. So very much, I wasn't making this film for echo chambers, or for, somehow to show people who already know this truth of life. While that's great that they watch it and it resonates, and in some ways maybe reawakens emotions that have been in slumber, great. But yes, my audience, if you like, very much was, I mean, if you say in mind, of course, as a filmmaker, you make a film and you don't know who's going to end up seeing it, and if it's even going to get the distribution like the present got, is very, very rare. So you hope for this audience, but you don't hold your breath for it. It was very much a Western audience, an audience who love film, interested in film. I was making, while it's based on truth and reality and all of that, it's a fiction film. It's not a documentary. I mean, scene 2 of the film is a real checkpoint, but it's a cinematic film in that sense. So I wanted the film to resonate with people who like film, who that wider audience of cinema goers, if you like. Not that it ended up in cinemas, but you understand what I mean. And I do think that Palestinians are very, very underrepresented and misrepresented people on the big screen. So for me, it's always wonderful if a film I've made ends up in front of audiences that do not understand or have misunderstood or are willfully blind to, who knows, or are unfortunately unaware of the reality of Palestinians' lives and struggles and all of that. So I had a Western audience in mind. Now, until that film ends up in front of that audience, you never know how it's going to be received. And so you asked me about response. And I believed in the depths of my heart that the world would like to see a film like The Present. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe not, I don't know. But I believe that generally people are interested and intrigued and would like to engage. Even it's set in a faraway land about a faraway people. Of course, it's been in the news and all of that over the years, but I think that there is a genuine interest and intrigue. Now, what this film did in many ways is confirm to me that belief. Because ultimately, you know, the reception it's had has been phenomenal from all over the world, from people from all sorts of cultures and ethnic backgrounds. And so whether it's, you know, the UK to Japan, Australia to Germany, you know, the Arab world to, you know, everywhere, Russia. And that's what's so wonderful in that sense. And that's the beauty of cinema. It kind of transcends borders and does have the capacity to tear down stereotypes and overcome misconceptions and misperceptions. So the response has been fantastic. And of course, the way the film has been awarded, I mean, I finally did a little count of the awards so far, because I was like, how many awards? And I was like, okay, you know, I really should do it. And you know, we've kind of gone past 40 international jury awards and audience awards. And again, that tells you audiences it's resonating with, and also the sort of film crowds and you know, film people. And the reception it had, winning a BAFTA, being nominated for an Oscar, that tells you again that it has resonated with a vast array of people across the world. So it just confirms that that target audience that I'd hoped for were the very audience that received it and even awarded it. And that's great. That gives me not just hope, but as a filmmaker, I'm thrilled, but because of the subject matter, because what was represented on that screen, you know, and I think that if I had actually ever told anyone, oh, I'm going to make a film, it's going to be on an Israeli checkpoint, you know, and that's it. It's going to be a short about an Israeli checkpoint. I mean, if we, you know, and it's going to win a BAFTA and go to the Oscars. Not that I had that prediction, but I'm just saying if I said that, I think people would have thought I was mad. And I think up until even the last minute, people thought this is mad. So, you know, and so to me, it confirms that there is that interest, there is that intrigue, and but it's up to us in many ways to create that content and that engagement and that art to communicate life, you know, and that reality. And in terms of negative responses, there is nothing worth even mentioning, to be really honest. There is nothing worth mentioning. Sure, on social media, I've had the occasional hateful message, completely based on absolute no substance, so they're just not even worth mentioning. And like I said, you know, the reception the film has had worldwide, it shows for itself. So I don't know. There was the only thing that I can point to was an attempt in Canada, but that was more an attack on Canadian TV, live news, for having me on in an interview. So they were attacking them for having apparently a propagandist on their show, you know, and that was ridiculous. And the funny part was they even posted the interview, and I hadn't seen the interview myself, on their website where they were attempting to have these complaints, you know, made. And I watched the interview and I went, oh, okay, that was a great interview. I don't, you know, I'm not a propagandist, so that's that. And that was it. That's all I can point to.
Wow, it's great. And I think one of the things you just said is interesting. You know, you said it 10 years ago, maybe it wouldn't have been able to have this response, and that what we're seeing is a kind of shift in support and recognition of the situation, maybe. But things have changed, and those people who've been trying to talk about what's going on in Palestine for many, many years had much more. They didn't do it as beautifully as you did, but there was less openness to it in the past, you know. And even just to say a personal note, when I watched the film again, I just was really struck by the father, of course, great actor, but and thinking about my dad, and you know what he went through when he used to talk about this in the 70s, and you know, being heckled, and you know, there was just no way to present this cause then. And I think now we have a much more receptive world that understands what's going on. So it's, you know, your gift, but also the timing. It probably came at a time when it could be appreciated for what it is and what you said there. So I wasn't planning to say this, but I just listening to you, I think, you know, maybe the last 10 years have been transformative.
Yeah, no, and I think that the sort of the traditional gatekeepers of keeping sort of the Zionist narrative or untrue narratives protected, technology has allowed for a sort of breakthrough of that. And then you've got things like these, you know, platforms, these online streamers like Netflix and so forth. So that, you know, reach has also been extended. And then of course the interest and intrigue of people, I think definitely is there. People want to understand more. And for me, a culminating moment actually was when former CIA director John Brennan wrote an opinion piece, which the New York Times published in print, a full page, and online, with a big picture of Yasmin from the film taking up half the page, and the title saying, "Why Joe Biden Should Watch This Palestinian Movie." And that for me, you know, again, you think 10 years ago, you know, that wouldn't have never happened. And then to be discussed on CNN with Christiana Amanpour, that was huge in that sense. And he referred to exactly what you said, which was back in the 1970s, he witnessed this all going on, and at the time could make sense of it. I mean, I'm not a fan of John Brennan, don't get me wrong here, but you know, security in the guise of this and that, you know, he says, but today, children like Yasmin, and he names her Yasmin, you know, have aspirations and inspirations and desires, aspirations for their freedom and, you know, their dreams. And this was talk on the basis of a film he said he just watched on Netflix. So yeah, there's context.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't followed that. Thanks so much. Well, I want to give Nadera a chance to respond to the film and to talk with you, because I know that she loved it and saw many connections to her own extensive work with children and families. And I should just say, for those of you who don't know her, she's both an big scholar, but an empathetic ethnographer and a therapist, as well as a law professor. And she's written powerfully and honestly about the psychic and the social impacts of the kind of situation that you brought to life in this film. And I thought especially, Nadera, of one of the most painful quotes from a Jerusalem schoolgirl that you gave us in the chapter you wrote for our book. And the girl didn't want to tell her father about the ways the soldiers had harassed and humiliated her at the checkpoint on the way to school or on the way back from school, because she said she saw his own humiliation. And she described the way he always looked down and hurried past the soldiers so as not to be picked out. And so she said, "I keep my pain to myself." I'm misquoting, but that's what I remember from that paper. It was just so powerful. And I think that's part of what's going on here. So Nadera, I turn to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lila, very much for remembering those voices, because that's exactly where I felt the power of the film is in really staging the simple things that are made so difficult, yeah, and how effectively children, parents, fathers are processing such brutalities, but also how effectively, emotionally, psychologically, and together they challenge it and they refuse it. You know, the way Yasmin pushed the fridge, and together one on this side and one on the other side managed. So I really felt that there is those very simple things of being able to show, here is my house, or we see it every day. You know, I'm talking to you from the old city of Jerusalem. So ordering or sending an ambulance, we had a story of a fridge in our house. And my husband, Gabby, doesn't speak Hebrew, and whether we will be able to get it to the house, because it's the old city, because of the security and the permits. And what you see also very, very strongly, you know, in addition to this trial, in those very intimate and small things of unparenting, unfathering, really hitting those very, very intimate connections where a child would feel protected and where a child would feel connected. Not that Yasmin stopped feeling connected, it continued with her, because the connection is much stronger than those checkpoints, yeah, or the so-called checkpoints. And I must say something, when I was listening to your discussions, that in the scenes where I write about in my chapter, Lila, the kids refused to call them checkpoints, refused to call them, the Israelis in Bab al-Amud, they call them the watchtowers. And the kids that I converse with call them Sanadi al-Atal, the killing boxes, because what you see there are soldiers that are carrying rifles and their job is to kill. This is how little kids like Yasmin are looking and are seeing. So that permit to cross under the power of those killing boxes, their the effect, the carcerality of something that is not carceral. No, there are no prison walls, but it's there. It's there on the psychic, and really imprisoning and incarcerating the psychic is major. But more than that, what I really talk about in my latest book on unchilding, because that routine witnessing of violence and that routine uprooting from the family, from the connection to the land, to the father, to the ability to control, is targeting children and childhood. And I really talk about the concept of unchilding to really shed the light on the way the Israeli state, the settler colonial state, uses kids as really capital in its hand to continue its brutality. And it's really, it is operated in those intimate spaces of the connection with the father, the ability, the waiting, just looking at Yasmin's waiting, yeah, and looking what happened to her while she was waiting. And that even that scene that I have looked at carefully and was wondering how we can see the unchilding in it, yeah. So I can see the caging, I can see the way she ended up peeing, but that peeing is a reflection of the anxiety, of the carcerality, of loss of control, but also of her refusal also to accept that control from the other side. So, or when she forgot the jacket. So when she forgot the jacket is what you have brought to us as her interruption of the Israeli unchilding. So they said, no, she's not a child. She's a potential terrorist. She's born criminal. She's dangerous other. And no, she's a child who's excited, who's enjoying the birds, yeah? who's having a tiara because the father bought her a tiara on his way. And I guess that element of understanding how the system is really unchilding, how that unchilding is moving between various contexts. It's that space on the beside the killing boxes. It's that space that is not seen on the local level, but it's that global silence. And I guess that movie brought it to really, your story of the CIA guy exactly tells me how it goes from the local to the global, yeah. And that different spaces of education, spaces of play, spaces of togetherness, it really invades the senses, yeah. It invades families, it invades relationship, it invades the home, it invades play. And then so I guess what I have seen is how unchilding operates in different spaces and temporalities. And it really enables us, if we think through that unchilding, enables us to think the complex and the multi-layered machinery of the colonial violence and the way it operates in such a disciplinary manner, because it's disciplining the father, it's disciplining the connection, it's disciplining the act to cross, yeah. And it really, if I use Professor Rita Jacquemin's words from Birzeit University, it really creates a wound inside where that unspoken witnessing of children are hidden. And I felt that the film really staged the unspoken mood of the child, of Yasmin. Even the use of the name Yasmin spoke to me so strongly, because Yasmin is Jasmine, is a beautiful name, is Layla's daughter's name. It's that beautiful smell against the peeing, against the incarceration, against the dispossession, against those killing boxes. So you bring a scene whereby a child and her father are speaking life, and that machinery of oppression is speaking death, is speaking with and through the killing boxes.
Wow. Can I just add something to what you said? There was an interview with the Prime Minister of Ireland, and then I kind of looked up what he'd said, but that when Palestinian children were interviewed, and please tell me, Nadera, if you've heard, this can confirm it in that sense, but Palestinian children were interviewed and they were asked, what is the worst part of this experience under military occupation, apartheid, and all of it? And it wasn't death. It was witnessing the humiliation of their parents. And that blew me away when I heard that. And this is since I made the film, and obviously naturally we know that witnessing the humiliation of your parents is horrible. But the fact that when they had to sort of tear it, it wasn't death. It wasn't the death of a parent even. It was the humiliation that their parents were enduring, which I found fascinating.
Well, I think that you can see it in different ways. Of course, death is very heavy on kids. And, from my experience, for example, with Sumud, her brother Nassim Abu Rumi was shot and killed, and Israel withheld his body. I saw her rage of how could they not only kill, but then withhold his body in the refrigerators. And then her dreams of him calling her from that refrigerator to say, and then I come to their house and I'm telling her, oh, the court meets on Sunday, and her inability to understand, but what do you mean a court? How can they try a dead body? This is where, and I'm talking about 11-year-old child, or Osama in Aisawi, once he was shot in his eye, and I went to interview him, and it's at my dentist's clinic, Dr. Nadera Shalhoub-Kevorkian in Aisawi. This is how, I meet people in different, and I asked him what happened, and he said he came back from school with the bus, And he was very hungry, very hungry. So when the bus stopped, he rushed home because he was hungry. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he felt something happen to his eye and the blood started coming. He told me the whole story of how they replaced his cheek and how much headache he has. And, you know, an hour of telling me a story. And then I said, Osama, so what are we going to do now? You know what he answered me, Farah? He said, خلاص بطلت أجوع. I'm not going to be hungry anymore. So children's perceptions, this is why when I put on the table, and I think that it's very important to understand childhood in our settler colonial context, that we really need to think through state terrorism, really through state terrorism. And that terrorism is the mediator par excellence of the colonial dispossession, yeah, because in order to understand what happened to Osama or what and how Sumud is understanding her childhood, it's beyond, and this is why I loved your movie. It's beyond bringing the blood and the loss and this. It's really bringing state terror, and it requires us to consider how the mundane violence, yeah, against children, against their beloved ones, are in fact terror. And that terror is as usual and is framed differently as security necessity, or as I say, as combat proven to be sold to other countries, to Modi in India to kill Kashmiris, or to Myanmar to kill Rohingyas, and so on. So I guess really it's very important what you brought is those things that might sound very simple, yeah, to reach school, to play with your with your ball. Look at the March of Return in Gaza, yeah, the Great March of Return. Ask children why do they go or they don't go. They will tell you. You know, in my research with kids on the March of Return, they tell you, I go there. You know, I remember one kid was fascinating that his mom said that she hit him because he's sneaking and going to the March of Return. And she said that I really hit him. I said, let's ask him. So we were on WhatsApp. And I asked him, طيب ليش? Why do you go if your mom is saying? And he said, بدي أروح أشم حيفا. I want to smell حيفا, to smell, yeah. And she said, check the web. Did you ever open your computer and looked for حيفا? And he said, no, but I want to smell it. I want to play. I want to die. You know what? And they're together. Play, die, live are in one sentence of an 11-year-old child. And then you read the Israeli soldiers, and they're counting how many eyes and how many legs they managed to hit. You know, that famous essay of one of the soldiers, 43 knees in one day. This is how, really, it's the gun to body dialectic that we need to look at. And this is where I think that I want us to think through state terror when we are looking at children, when we're looking at families, when we're looking at fathers, at mothers.
Wasn't a question there, but we are beginning to get some questions that relate to this. I don't know if we could move to that, unless Farah, you want to speak to what Nadera has been talking about.
It's beautiful to hear her speak. No, nothing to add. And we can go to questions and then carry on with the conversation, however it goes.
Okay, we can start with that. Thanks, Nadera, so much. You always bring it home to what's actually going on, but I see the connections are so amazing here. So there are actually two questions that are related to each other about the film. And one of them was, I absolutely love the film. The ending portrays an unrealistic situation of the soldiers letting the dad and daughter pass through peacefully, when in reality, it would have ended in a tragedy. Why did you choose to end the film on a happy somewhat utopian note, which is interesting. But there's another question that picks up on that, which is, yeah, that the soldiers wouldn't have perceived Yasmin as innocent and let her pass through the checkpoint, and we were all terrified, at that moment. I think it would be great to hear about that.
I wouldn't call the ending happy and utopian, but because there's always tomorrow and that checkpoint's not going anywhere. And this is, but certainly I'm under no illusion. And I always point to the fact that the most fictitious point in this film, and as I said, it is a fiction film based very much on reality. The most fictitious element of it is the ending. I'm fully aware of that. And I know that a more realistic outcome would be injury, death, arrest. I'm aware of that. But it is a creative choice, and I wanted to offer something more hopeful, a suggestion that it's the youth that are coming out perhaps stronger and wiser and more defiant even, possibly. Yeah, it was a more hopeful ending, if you like. And I realize that that's not necessarily reality, but I think that the message of the film was well received. It was understood. This is an unjust reality, and it is painful and is humiliating and all that. And I didn't need to take it to that level of complete tragedy, because like I said, what happens then is no hope. And that's also a dangerous place to take the conversation as well. So, it was a choice. And I think ultimately it wasn't all, unicorns and rainbows. I mean, they walk off alive, but, they've got to battle with that checkpoint the next day and the day after and so forth. And I think the idea is to leave people contemplating, rather than stooped in tragedy, in that sense. So it was a choice. But yeah, I'm under no illusion, and I know that. I know that that's not the more realistic outcome at all. And I'm sad to say, well, I could point to everything in this entire film as dozens and dozens of people who can relate to that story, hundreds of thousands actually people who can relate to the story. I never heard a story from anyone where they said, oh, there was this time when, my kid took something, or there was a time when, I'm sad to say there is no story that I can say to you, well, there was one time someone told me that this and this happened. I'd like to think, though, when you see the argument between the two soldiers, because one was obviously prepared to go after them. The other two, to me anyway, were your teenage soldiers who, frankly, the fact that they're holding weapons and essentially trained to kill is disturbing in itself. But the one that wants to go after, and then there's the one that says no. And I would like to think that there are soldiers that are not particularly happy or comfortable with the acts that they perform or that they are expected to perform. I'd like to think that. Yeah.
That's great.
Maybe I just say one thing about this question is that I think that it's very, very important to know that children are not neutral. They see, they hear, they feel. Maybe they don't scream, maybe they do scream. Maybe they will throw a stone to say, I refuse to accept humiliation as part of my daily life. Maybe they will walk to school and will say, no, I will study to be a lawyer, and then I will fight them. But I think that if there's a message here, number one, Yasmin was not neutral. She did something her way, yeah? And I think that this would always, it's very important to show that there are different ways and kids would react in different manners. And there are multiplicity of reactions to such a very, very painful condition. But as to the soldiers, the entire question of why did you buy a fridge is not a stupid question. It happens. Yeah, it happens. Why are you going to have it, to give birth in that hospital? Why did you buy, we bought grapes, anab, from Ramallah the other day, and they did not allow it in. And they said, no, we need to circle around and put it in a different place. And Gabby went and gave it to one of the kids that were selling stuff on them because they wanted to throw it. So it might be stupid, but that's exactly how they behave. And it's all about power, and it's all about abuse of power. But the sentence that was used in the movie is that only this way you behave, only this way you treat Palestinians. That's exactly what the sentence said, yeah? And that is very telling, because it is this indoctrination of the soldiers that this is how you treat a Palestinian. And you treat a Palestinian by putting them down, and you treat the Palestinian, even if there's a discussion between the soldiers there. We see it that it's part of the way there. And I also really hope that some of them can see what is there and not turn a blind eye. And because it actually, if it reveals something, it reveals the settler states' psychic structures. And that psychic structure of, we're exclusive, we're the sacred, we're this, it exactly revealed that psychic structure. And it's very exposing. There is no need to shoot. It's very clear who you are, and you look really ugly. And I thought that it was really bad.
Yeah, there's another thing I did that I know is also not very, very realistic, which is, at one point he says, Avi, you know me. Now, again, one of the things that the Israeli military deliberately do is they do not leave soldiers in specific checkpoints for long enough, deliberately, so that personal humanized relationships do not develop. This is a deliberate process. Don't leave our soldiers at posts for too long, that you start to actually see the Palestinians that you are processing through this control system as human. Next thing you know, you're saying good morning to each other. You see what I mean? So there is a point of, don't let, from the psyche point of view, and otherwise the cognitive dissonance, I'm sure, kicks in, but and in the film, no, I had Avi as someone that he had seen maybe a bit more than the others. Again, I know that's not the most realistic thing, but
But that's exactly why the Palestinian cause is what it speaks exactly, because Palestinians were here, but it's a land with no people for people with no land. It's to say that we are no people. It's not that they don't see us. Avi, you know me, yeah? And home is here. They know that Palestinians are here. Home is here. And they know that it's their homeland. And they know we are here. But it's a choice. It's a choice not to see us, not to acknowledge, but it doesn't work. It's not only that it's not working, they made it together. And the fact that they made it together, the father and Yasmin, is exactly what I would like to tell the audience, that we can make it together by insisting on keeping that narrative of a just cause, of a right to land, of a right to homeland. So I take that into interrupting that psychic structure of that sacred and the profane, those that are people and the no people. And I think that scene brought to me the history, and brought to me Rashid Khalid's work and Walid Khalid's work and Noor Masalha. It really brought it to my mind right away.
Yeah, I think the line, I just want to go home, is I just want to go home, there's my house, and I just want to go home. That's millions of people's, I just want to go home. It's
but brought to this specific thing that my home is actually right there. And of course it has this symbolic meaning. So the person who asked the question maybe about the ending wanted to clarify that it didn't seem a question of hope, but rather perhaps an unintended effect, to render IDF behavior as more humane than it is experienced, that they didn't shoot them or arrest them or kill them or whatever, which has effects for audiences who are already steeped in the false narrative. But I mean, I don't think you have to answer that, but she just wanted to qualify. And there's a lot of praise for the film, which, it's out there. But there's some interesting questions, coming back to the father-daughter relationship and asking a little bit more about that, because it was very powerful. And for Neda to expand a little bit on the research of parent-child relations, but also the back pain and what that signified for you. Did you, tiredness, emotional pain, it's running through the whole situation, and just to elaborate a bit more on that.
Just first, in response to that comment, I know it wasn't a question, but I think it's nice to have the conversation sort of, and something came to my mind, which is that I think with the film, it was very clear and who the protagonist is, who the antagonist is, what the situation was, and the inhumanity of it all. And I've never felt that in order in many ways to humanize my characters, which you must naturally do, your storytelling, and I want this father and daughter to be alive and loved and empathetic, I do not need to dehumanize anyone else. You know what I mean? That's how I see it. And so I don't think I was glorifying the other at all in that sense, or making them appear better than they are. At the same time, on the individual level, they're human beings. We're human beings, and there's going to be that dissonance, and there's going to be, and if I put it into someone's articulated. So at the end of the day, maybe an Avi would not have spoken up, but one has to believe on the human level, even if Avi hadn't spoken, he might have thought she's just a child. I have to believe that there is the human in others, regardless, in that sense. And in terms of the back pain, it's interesting. So again, for me, I always find that people look at the oppression of others from afar as if it exists in kind of a vacuum of all other headaches of life just don't exist. So for me, it was this person, this father, as is the case for the entire population of Palestine, have to deal with the usual crap of life, separate to military occupation and apartheid. And then in addition to military occupation apartheid, it's not that they don't have migraines. It's not that they don't need the bathroom. It's not that it doesn't rain on them. It's not that they don't suffer from a slip disc or a sports injury or, these things exist. And so for me, I remember sitting with Hind Shafani, and I said to her, Hind, I want Yusuf to have a physical ailment, one that anyone in the world could have. It has nothing to do with occupation. It's nothing, just, migraines or anyway. Hind suffers from a bit of back pain, and she's like, okay, what about back pain? I said, there it is. It's back pain. And this is something that I've had people in Q&As actually relate to, complete foreigners going, I know what it's like to have back pain. Now, if you have back pain and you have to stop at a bus stop in London, and a bus is coming every 2 minutes, and it's a different ballgame. What if you have back pain and you have to stand at a checkpoint to go to work every single day in what you saw in scene 2 for 3 hours every single day? What does that mean? So it was just taking the level of what are normal, again, the mundane in some ways, or the normal rut of life, and having to deal with. So when it started to rain, it wasn't hail a cab, we're good to go. But rain is rain, or your daughter needs the bathroom. For anyone else, it's a very simple thing. Okay, we're gonna run into that cafe. Or we're gonna, what do you do when you're at a checkpoint. So the usual of life happens for Palestinians. It's not that they suffer what they suffer without what we all suffer in our daily lives. That's there as well. What am I going to eat? What time are my kids going to go to bed? What are we, it's there. So yeah, that was the reason he has back pain.
I would also take the back pain to another place to say that it's the embodiment of that settler colonial regime, because it is inside, it's in our bodies, and we all feel it. We all really feel it viscerally. So it's the viscerality, but it's the embodiment. So that checkpoint is inside I have an amazing student, Abir Othman, who works on fatherhood, and she really talks about how fathers they feel the handcuffed, and this feeling it, and that handcuffing is really affecting his back, is affecting his mind, is affecting his ability to be there sometimes. And it's all against the futurity of Palestinians. So you see it. And I also saw it with the mother, somehow we did not talk about the mother, but all of a sudden you see the pain and power in her eyes. Yeah, you see it when she says Kul aam wa antum bkhair, because it's their wedding anniversary. And you see her, you see it so strongly. So I guess this is what in fathering and in mothering and in parenting under such a context, it's also turning parents, as I say when I talk about house arrest in Jerusalem, when they end up putting children in house arrest and turning parents into prison guards, yeah, and asking them to watch and to cage and to incarcerate when they're barely moving, because it's the state from one side, it's their need to be there for their kids. So I guess it's really the importance of looking at what you have showed us, and to expose the racialized political work of state violence that really constructs parenting, childhood, motherhood. It directs it, it governs it, it transforms it in so many ways. And that, in order to further control and dispossess. So it is that connection between land, life, that is really embodied in the feeling, in that back pain, in that checkpoint in the back, yeah, that is really handcuffing, if I use Abir's concept.
Yeah, and I think very, very much there is the symbolism of it without question as well. And there's a lot of symbolism in the film. Not everyone sees it. And there's different things that I know. For example, when she takes off his jacket and she's back in her red jacket, it was because the chains of his trauma and his pains, and he shrouds her in his jacket. For me, that was a very symbolic thing. And then she takes it off and she does what she does. And the back pain, very much the symbolism of it. And I deliberately didn't want to explain the back pain, where it's from or whatever, exactly for that kind of interpretation. It is the manifesting of all that pain, of course, that manifests in the bodies of anyone who's under stress and pressure. And so, yeah.
And I guess that's exactly where my work on unchilding, because I kind of feel in the film and while working with children and parents, that how unchilding, turning her into a non-child, non-existing, like as if she's not there, with their beautiful eyes and her looks and her love to her dad, and it's just saying no, as Ayala Chaked said clearly, these are not children, these are little snakes. So this is the perception, the psychic of the settler, while the whole political work of unchilding, it operates profoundly through the disruption of the intimate, yeah, that is embodied really in the visceral. So it's that global silence and local politics of silence, of the bystanders, of the inaction, yeah, with really all the wounding regulations of security that are so profound in our context. And then we look at our kids. I'll never forget my daughter Tamtam, when one day she went to school and it's a Saturday, and this is the first time she wanted to go with Vahe alone, and I should look from the window, and it's Saturday, no movement here. And on her way, and like wearing the red school thing, the garmir koknots, we say it in Armenian, a Jewish neighbor stopped her, started screaming, Shabbat, Shabbat, and pushing her. And you should have seen her. She was maybe 6 years old, screaming, Mama, Mama, Mama. And she said something that is between Hebrew and Arabic, and Ima sheli tudrub otcha, my mom will hit you. Yeah. And I needed to run to help her. And this is a trauma that stays with them. But this is something that if a neighbor would feel that he has the right to stop a 5 or 6 year old child, prevent her from going to school because this is his street, it's while our school here works and functions, it is very telling. So that psychic element that is interrupting, or it's unchilding my Tamtam, my daughter, my Tamara. And while her way of calling me, Mama, Mama, is calling for help. And we know how incarcerated we are in that system, but we also know how they operate. So the question is, how do we really break that global silence and local acceptance, even by the soldiers that are standing in those killing boxes? Because what are they doing? They're carrying rifles and they're carrying a million things. So the question is, how do we really unpack it and stop this inaction and stop that wounding regulations that we see it against our kids, against our role as parents, against our role as people that are living here.
I may shift a little bit. I wanted to note that I think it's Simone also is confirming what you're talking about, that it's very significant that Yasmin doesn't alert her dad to the fact that she's wet herself. That's the burden, which I think the silence about it, the want to protect. And I wanted to say one other thing, and let maybe one more professional question that's come in, but also to pick up on one of the things about the differentiation of the IDF soldiers. And the Avi might be a little bit different, or you have to think that they think differently. And I've walked with Nadera in the old city and seen her pick out someone who she knew would talk Arabic, maybe Druze or something like that, and say, what are you doing with these? What are you doing here? And really just confront him with, like, why are you part of this system? When you know better, you should be thinking differently. And so I think there's a sense that, you have to reach people to call their conscience and be able to differentiate and be able to think that some people could not be bystanders or even the perpetrators. It was a very powerful experience for me and terrifying to be walking with you when that happened. But I wanted to give credit to somebody else who's, asking not a surprising question of you, Farah. We only have 2 minutes left, but was asking about how do you about your professional path that got you there, and any advice you have for future filmmakers who want to do who similarly want to combine the art of cinema with Palestinian human rights activism in 2 minutes. But I think it should be there because people are going to be looking to you for these questions because you are a model for this. You're muted still.
Sorry. yeah, my background is not film. Yes, no, I have like a business background, and I was an investment banker, and I ran a business, and so yeah, complete 180-degree change in the trajectory of my life, and very much on the back of what was my first and then consecutive trips to Palestine. Only a few years back for the first time as an adult, having gone many times as a child, but then nothing past the sort of first intifada, 25 years, nothing. And I was just so overwhelmed by everything I thought I'd understood about the reality there and read about and everything, but really there had been no substitute for seeing that reality on the ground with my own two eyes. And you know, so in your case, who was asking the question, if you're already in the film world, there's not much I can tell you about transitioning, just to know that, you know, ultimately I jumped into the deep end. I did adapt certain things that I had written, interestingly enough, for personal therapy on the back of my trips there, with no intention of making films. So it was a way of me dealing with the reality that I'd come to witness and see and experience. But just jumping in the deep end, and I think my advice in terms of just filmmaking is, I came at this as, I want to tell these human stories. I want to express myself creatively, but I want to, it wasn't just for the sake of film. It wasn't that I wanted to just be a filmmaker. That wasn't separate to, I wanted to be a filmmaker who could tell these human Palestinian stories. So for me, it was a combination. Whether in the future I tell stories that are Palestinian stories and other stories, doesn't matter, that's my prerogative. But I hope to continue, regardless of whatever else I might do, to continue to tell these Palestinian stories. So I'm driven by what could be, in some ways, you could say, I mean, there was an art critic who said, you cannot make art without a sense of identity. It is identity you seek by making art. I am pursuing, in many ways, my film career as a means of my identity as a filmmaker, as a human being, but as a Palestinian. It speaks to me. So the subject matter. So I hope that's the same for you, whoever you are. If you want to make, you know, use your creative capabilities in film and Palestinian rights, is a beautiful combination, of course, then great, you're in the right space. There's nothing I can add to that. Go for it, you know? You're there. I had to get there, if you get my meaning. I had to get to that place where I felt I could and I should, and I felt called to it. You're already called to it by the sounds of it. So not much more I can add, except, you know, tunnel vision and go with instinct, go with what it is that you feel called to. Yeah, that's it.
That's an amazing way to end. And I'm sorry, I have to cut it off. We're actually a little bit over time, but thank you so much, Farah, for being with us. And thank you, Nadera, for sharing all that you do and know, which dovetails so incredibly with what Farah was doing through this film. So thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Nadera, as well. And everyone. Bye-bye.